Karoline Leavitt rubbed her tired eyes as the clock on her office wall showed 11:30 p.m. The building was nearly empty, with most staff having gone home hours ago. Only the soft hum of the cleaning equipment in the distance broke the silence. As the youngest communications director in White House history, Karoline often worked late into the night. Tonight was no different as she struggled to perfect a speech for tomorrow's important press conference. Her desk was covered with papers, sticky notes, and 3 empty coffee cups. The pressure never seemed to end in this job. At 27, she had already climbed higher than most people twice her age, but the constant need to prove herself worthy of the position weighed heavily on her shoulders. Karoline stretched and decided to get one last cup of coffee before finishing the final draft. The break room was down the hall past several darkened offices. The building felt different at night, peaceful yet somehow more serious without the usual bustle of important people rushing about. As she approached the break room, she heard a voice. Someone was speaking in what sounded like French, the words flowing with perfect pronunciation and natural rhythm. Curious, Karoline slowed her steps. The voice switched languages mid-conversation, now speaking what she recognized as German. Peering around the doorway, Karoline saw Manuel Garcia, one of the building's janitors. He was speaking on his cell phone while taking a short break from his cleaning duties. Manuel was an older man, probably in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He had worked in the building for years, always polite but mostly invisible to the busy staff who rarely took notice of the maintenance crew. Manuel finished his call and put his phone away, turning to find Karoline watching him with surprise on her face. "I'm sorry, Ms. Leavitt," he said quickly in perfect English. "I was just taking a short break. I'll get back to work right away." "No, please," Karoline said, stepping into the room. "Your break isn't what caught my attention. Was that French? And German you were speaking?" Manuel looked down, almost embarrassed. "Yes, I was talking to an old friend who moved to Europe many years ago. We switch between languages sometimes." "That's incredible," Karoline said, genuinely impressed. "I studied French for 4 years in college and can barely order dinner in Paris. You sounded completely fluent." Manuel smiled modestly. "I've always had a good ear for languages." Karoline moved to the coffee machine and started brewing a fresh cup. "So you speak English, French, German, and I'm guessing Spanish?" "Spanish was my first language," Manuel confirmed. "I grew up in Guatemala before moving to the United States." "That's 4 languages then." "Very impressive," Karoline said as she waited for her coffee. Manuel hesitated before speaking again. "Actually, I speak 9 languages." The coffee machine beeped, but Karoline didn't notice. "9? Did you say 9 languages?" Manuel nodded, still looking somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. "Spanish, English, French, and German, yes, but also Portuguese, Italian, Russian, Mandarin, and Arabic." Karoline forgot about her coffee completely. "Are you serious? You speak all those languages fluently?" "Yes," Manuel said simply. "Some better than others, but I can have conversations in all of them." That's extraordinary," Karoline said, trying to process this information. The janitor who quietly cleaned their offices each night spoke more languages than anyone she knew in the entire diplomatic corps. "How did you learn so many?" Manuel relaxed a little, seeing her genuine interest. "I've always loved languages. Even as a child, I would listen to foreign radio stations and try to understand the words. Later, I found books, audio lessons, and eventually online courses. But mostly I learned by making friends from different countries and practicing with them." "But why?" Karoline stopped herself, realizing the question might sound rude. Manuel understood anyway. "Why am I working as a janitor?" He smiled without bitterness. "Life doesn't always reward the things we're good at, Ms. Leavitt. Without formal education or certificates, doors don't open easily. I applied for translator positions years ago but was always overlooked. Eventually, I needed steady work to support my family." Karoline felt a mix of emotions: amazement at Manuel's hidden talent, sadness at the waste of such an extraordinary skill, and something else that was beginning to take shape in her mind. An idea. Would you mind showing me? She asked suddenly. Showing? You? Your language skills. Could you say something in Mandarin, for example? Manuel thought for a moment, then spoke several sentences in fluent Mandarin. Though Karoline couldn't understand the words, the confidence and natural flow were unmistakable. This wasn't someone who had memorized a few phrases. This was true fluency. And Arabic? She requested. Again, Manuel switched languages effortlessly, speaking with the proper accent and intonation. One more, Karoline said. Russian. Manuel complied, speaking Russian with the same ease as he had spoken English to her moments before. Karoline finally remembered her coffee and picked it up, her mind racing. Manuel, how long have you worked here? Almost 7 years now, he replied. And in all that time, has anyone else discovered your language abilities? Manuel shook his head. A few people have heard me on phone calls, but no one ever asked about it. People see the uniform in the cleaning cart, Ms. Leavitt. They don't see much else. The truth of his words hit Karoline hard. How many times had she passed Manuel in the hallway with barely a nod? How many staff members treated the maintenance workers as part of the furniture, rather than as people with their own stories, talents, and dreams? I should get back to work, Manuel said, glancing at the clock. The third floor still needs cleaning. Of course, Karoline said, but her mind was already elsewhere, planning. Thank you for sharing this with me, Manuel. It's truly remarkable. As she walked back to her office, coffee in hand, Karoline couldn't stop thinking about what she had discovered. The upcoming Global Security Summit would bring delegates from over 30 countries to Washington. The State Department was already scrambling to find enough qualified translators and interpreters, and here was a man with an extraordinary gift for languages, working night shifts cleaning the very offices where diplomatic strategies were formed. Karoline sat back at her desk, the speech she had been working on forgotten. She opened her laptop and began typing a new document, a proposal that would likely raise eyebrows and challenge the conventional hiring practices of government agencies. What she was about to suggest might even put her own rising career at risk. But something about Manuel's humble acceptance of his circumstances, combined with his remarkable talent, had stirred something in Karoline. She had always believed in recognizing merit wherever it was found. Now was her chance to put that belief into action. As the night grew later, Karoline refined her proposal. By the time she finally left the office at 2 a.m., she had a clear plan in mind. Tomorrow, after the press conference, she would speak to Richard Howell, the Director of International Communications. She would fight for Manuel to have a chance to use his extraordinary skills in service of his country. What began as a chance late-night encounter was about to change both their lives forever. Karoline didn't know if her plan would work, but she was determined to try. The janitor who spoke 9 languages deserved to be seen for his true abilities, not just for the uniform he wore. Karoline barely slept that night. Her mind kept returning to Manuel and his incredible gift for languages. By morning, she had fully committed to her plan, though she knew it wouldn't be easy. Government agencies rarely broke from traditional hiring practices, especially for positions that dealt with sensitive information. She arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to catch Manuel before he finished his night shift. She found him emptying trash bins in the conference room, his movements efficient and practiced. "Good morning, Manuel," Karoline said, setting her bag down on a chair. Manuel looked up, surprised to see her so early. "Good morning, Ms. Leavitt. You're here early today." "I wanted to talk to you before you left," she said. "Do you have a few minutes?" Manuel checked his watch. "Yes, I'm almost finished with my shift." Karoline closed the conference room door to ensure their privacy. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night, about your language skills." Manuel nodded but remained silent, his expression cautious. "I have a proposal for you," Karoline continued. "Next month, we're hosting the Global Security Summit. There will be delegates from over 30 countries, and we're short on qualified translators and interpreters." Manuel's eyes widened slightly as he began to understand where this conversation might be heading. "I want to recommend you for a position on the translation team," Karoline said directly. Your skills are too valuable to waste, especially when we need them so badly. Manuel set down his cleaning supplies and sat in one of the conference chairs. Ms. Leavitt, I appreciate your thought, but it's not that simple. Those positions require security clearances, degrees, certifications, things I don't have. Security. Clearances can be arranged, Karoline countered. You've worked in this building for 7 years. That's a better record than many new hires. As for the rest, degrees and certifications only matter if they reflect actual ability. Your abilities speak for themselves. Manuel shook his head slowly. People like me don't get those kinds of opportunities, Ms. Leavitt. I've tried before. People like you? Karoline questioned. Immigrants without college education? Maintenance workers, Manuel explained quietly. The world has certain paths for certain people. Karoline leaned forward. That's exactly the kind of thinking I want to challenge. Tell me about yourself, Manuel. Your background, your story. Help me understand so I can make the best case for you. Manuel hesitated, then began speaking. He had grown up in a small town outside Guatemala City. His parents had limited education but valued learning. His gift for languages appeared early. By age 10, he was translating for tourists who visited their town. A kind American missionary had helped him improve his English. When Manuel was 22, political unrest and economic hardship pushed him to seek a better life in America. He arrived illegally but with few resources. His first jobs were in restaurants and cleaning services. Eventually, he married Rita, another Guatemalan immigrant, and they had 2 children, Luis, now 21 and studying engineering at Community College, and Elena, 18, who hoped to become a nurse. Throughout the years, Manuel never stopped learning languages. He practiced during lunch breaks, on bus rides, and late at night after his family was asleep. He joined online language exchange groups and volunteered as a translator at his church and his children's schools. I applied for professional translator positions 3 times, Manuel explained. Once at a hospital, once with a government contractor, and once with the UN. Each time they were impressed with my interview until they saw my resume. No degree, no formal training, no certificates. They always chose someone with credentials, even if that person spoke fewer languages less fluently. As Manuel spoke, Karoline took notes. She was forming a strategy in her mind. Have you ever been officially tested? Had your language proficiency formally evaluated? She asked. Manuel shook his head. Those tests cost money, and without the education to back them up, I wasn't sure they would help. Karoline checked her watch. Her press conference was in 3 hours and she still needed to review her speech. Manuel, I believe in recognizing talent wherever it's found. Would you be willing to take a chance if I can arrange it? Manuel studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity or empty promises. Finding none, he nodded slowly. My family has sacrificed too much for me to turn down any opportunity. If you truly think this is possible, I'll try. Good, Karoline said with determination. I'll speak to Richard Howell today after the press conference. He's the Director of International Communications and will be overseeing the translation teams for the summit. Manuel stood up, returning to his cleaning cart. Thank you for your kindness, Ms. Leavitt, but please don't put yourself at risk for me. Your career is important. Karoline smiled. Some things are more important than playing it safe, Manuel. I'll be in touch soon. After Manuel left, Karoline spent an hour refining her proposal. She knew Richard Howell well enough to anticipate his objections. He was competent but traditional, someone who followed established protocols and rarely took chances. She would need solid arguments to convince him. The press conference went smoothly, with Karoline deftly handling questions about the administration's new economic policies. Afterward, she headed straight to Richard's office, her proposal saved on her tablet and her arguments ready. Richard was on a call when she arrived, so Karoline waited outside his office, rehearsing her approach. Susan Bennett from the State Department walked by, pausing when she saw Karoline. Great job at the press conference, Susan said. Very smooth handling of those budget questions. Thanks, Susan, Karoline replied, then had a sudden thought. Actually, you might be able to help me with something. How's the translation team coming along for the summit? Susan frowned. It's a nightmare, honestly. We're still short at least 6 qualified people, especially for Arabic and Mandarin. The agencies are sending us resumes, but the good ones are already booked for other events. This was exactly the opening Karoline needed. What if I told you I found someone who speaks both those languages fluently, plus 7 others? Susan's eyebrows shot up. I'd say introduce me to this unicorn immediately. Where have they been hiding? Right under our noses, actually, Karoline said. I'll explain everything soon. Just keep an open mind, okay? Richard's office door opened and his previous visitor left. Karoline took a deep breath and walked in, her determination stronger than ever. Richard, do you have a few minutes? I have. A somewhat unusual proposal that might solve our translation problems for the summit. Richard gestured for her to sit. I'm intrigued. What's this about? Karoline set her tablet on his desk. It's about finding extraordinary talent in unexpected places, and about giving someone a chance to serve their country using their remarkable gifts. As she began explaining her discovery of Manuel's abilities, Richard's expression changed from curiosity to skepticism. Karoline had anticipated this reaction, but she was prepared to fight. The janitor who spoke 9 languages deserved this chance, and she was determined to make Richard and everyone else see what she had seen. Not the uniform, but the brilliant mind behind it. The real battle was just beginning, and Karoline knew it would test her persuasive skills like nothing before. But as she continued her pitch, she felt confident that this was a fight worth having. Not just for Manuel, but for the principle that talent and ability should matter more than titles and traditional credentials. Richard Howell leaned back in his chair, his face a mix of disbelief and amusement. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, he said slowly. You want me to interview our janitor for a position on the international translation team for the Global Security Summit? Karoline had expected this reaction. I want you to interview a man who speaks 9 languages fluently, she corrected. The fact that he currently works as a janitor is irrelevant to his linguistic abilities. Richard sighed and rubbed his temples. Karoline, I appreciate your creative thinking, but we have protocols. We hire people with degrees in international relations, linguistics, or diplomacy. People with credentials and security clearances. And how many of those credentialed people speak 9 languages? Karoline challenged. You heard Susan just now. We're short on translators, especially for Arabic and Mandarin. Manuel speaks both, fluently, plus 7 other languages. Even if what you're saying is true, it is true, Karoline interrupted. I heard him myself. Even so, Richard continued, there are procedures, background checks, security concerns. We can't just pluck someone from the maintenance staff and put them in sensitive diplomatic discussions. Karoline leaned forward. Manuel has worked in this building for 7 years. He's had a security clearance the entire time. Maintenance staff need that to work in these offices. And he's not some random person I found on the street. He's a dedicated worker who has an extraordinary talent that we're wasting. Richard didn't look convinced. This isn't how things are done, Karoline. Maybe it's time to change how things are done, she replied. We're facing a real problem with the summit next month. We need translators. Manuel needs a chance to use his abilities. This solves both issues. The discussion continued for nearly an hour. Richard raised objection after objection, and Karoline countered each one. She had done her homework. She knew the hiring regulations, the security protocols, and the urgent needs of the upcoming summit. As their conversation grew more heated, Greg Phillips, Karoline's deputy communications director, poked his head into the office. Sorry to interrupt, Greg said, but the secretary wants the briefing notes for tomorrow's meeting. Should I tell her you'll be a few more minutes? No need, Richard said, standing up. We're done here. Karoline has an interesting idea, but it's simply not feasible. Karoline didn't move from her chair. We're not done, she said firmly. Greg, please tell the secretary we'll have those notes in 30 minutes. Greg looked between them, sensing the tension, then nodded and closed the door. You're being stubborn, Richard said once they were alone again. I'm being persistent, Karoline replied. There's a difference. Richard sat back down with a sigh. What exactly do you want from me? Give him one chance, Karoline said. One informal assessment. If he fails to impress you, I'll never mention it again. But if he's as good as I believe he is, you consider him for a position on the translation team. Richard studied her for a long moment. You're really putting yourself out there for this janitor. Why? Because talent deserves recognition regardless of title or background, Karoline answered without hesitation. And because we need him, whether you want to admit it or not. After another long pause, Richard finally nodded. Fine. One assessment tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll have Linda from Russian Affairs and Peter from East Asian Communications there to evaluate his skills in those languages. And Susan from State, Karoline added quickly. She speaks Arabic. Richard gave her a look but agreed. And Susan, but Karoline, if this goes badly, it reflects on you. Your judgment will be questioned. I understand the risk, she said, standing to leave. Thank you for agreeing to this. As Karoline left Richard's office, she felt a mix of triumph and anxiety. The hard part was just beginning. Now she needed to prepare Manuel for tomorrow's assessment, a test that could change his life and potentially her career. She found Manuel in the employee locker room, changing out of his work uniform into street clothes as his shift had ended. He looked surprised to see her there. Ms. Leavitt, is something wrong? No, Karoline said, stepping into the room. Actually, something might be very right. I spoke with Richard Howell, the Director of International Communications. He's agreed to assess your language skills tomorrow morning. Manuel froze, one arm still in his jacket sleeve. Tomorrow? So soon? I had to push hard to get this opportunity, Karoline explained. We need to move quickly before he changes his mind. Manuel slowly finished putting on his jacket, his expression troubled. Ms. Leavitt, I appreciate what you're doing, but I'm not sure this is a good idea. I have no formal training, no education in diplomatic protocol. They're not testing you on protocol, Karoline assured him. Just your language skills. That's your strength. Manuel sat down on a bench, clearly overwhelmed. Who will be there? What should I wear? I don't own a suit. Karoline sat beside him. Richard will be there, along with 3 language specialists who speak Russian, Mandarin, and Arabic. They'll have conversations with you in those languages to assess your fluency. As for what to wear, just the best clothes you have. This is an informal assessment. Manuel nodded slowly, taking it all in. What time tomorrow? 10 o'clock, Karoline said. I'll meet you in the lobby at 9:30 to bring you up. As they talked, Karoline could see Manuel's anxiety battling with hope. For years, he had given up on his dream of using his language skills professionally. Now suddenly that door was opening again. What if I fail? He asked quietly. You won't fail, Karoline assured him. Just speak naturally the way you did with me. Your abilities will speak for themselves. Manuel took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. My wife won't believe this when I tell her. She's been telling me for years that my gift was being wasted. Smart woman, Karoline smiled. Get a good night's rest. Tomorrow is an important day. After Manuel left, Karoline returned to her office to finish the briefing notes for the secretary. Her mind was racing with plans and contingencies. She had stuck her neck out for Manuel, risking her professional reputation. If tomorrow went badly, her judgment would be questioned. Richard would never let her forget it. But if it went well, if Manuel impressed them the way she believed he would, it could change everything, not just for him, but for how talent was recognized in their department. That night, Karoline stayed, late again, researching similar cases where unconventional hires had been made in government positions. She needed every argument at her disposal for the battles ahead. Because even if Manuel passed tomorrow's assessment, she knew that would just be the beginning of their fight. At home, Manuel shared the news with his family over dinner. His wife Rita cried tears of joy and pride. His son Luis offered to lend him his best shirt. His daughter Elena helped him practice his English, asking the kinds of questions he might face tomorrow. For the first time in many years, Manuel allowed himself to hope. to dream again of using his greatest gift in a meaningful way. As he practiced switching between languages late into the night, he silently thanked Karoline Leavitt for seeing beyond his janitor's uniform to the person beneath. Tomorrow would be a day of judgment for both of them, a day that might change everything. Manuel arrived at the building entrance at 9:15 the next morning, a full 15 minutes before he was supposed to meet Karoline. He wore dark blue pants, a light blue button-up shirt that his son had insisted he borrow, and a simple tie. His shoes were polished to a shine and his hair was neatly combed. Despite his efforts to look professional, he felt out of place without his maintenance uniform. Several staff members walked past him, some nodding in recognition, others looking confused to see the janitor in regular clothes during daytime hours. Manuel stood nervously by the security desk, checking his watch every few minutes. Karoline appeared at 9:25, rushing through the lobby with her usual energy. She smiled when she saw Manuel. "You're early," she said, approaching him. "I couldn't sleep much," Manuel admitted. "I wanted to make sure I wasn't late." Karoline looked him over quickly. "You look great. Are you ready?" Manuel took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." They rode the elevator to the 4th floor, where the International Communications Department was located. Karoline used the time to give Manuel last-minute advice. "Just be yourself," she said. "Don't try to use fancy words or diplomatic language. They want to see your natural fluency." Manuel nodded, his hands fidgeting with his visitor badge. "What if they ask about my background, my lack of education?" "Be honest," Karoline advised. "Your life experience is valuable. Don't apologize for your path." The elevator doors opened, and Karoline led Manuel down a carpeted hallway to a conference room. Through the glass walls, Manuel could see 4 people already seated inside: Richard Howell, Linda Murray, Peter Franklin, and Susan Bennett. Karoline squeezed Manuel's arm reassuringly before opening the door. "You've got this," she whispered. The room fell silent as they entered. Richard stood up, his expression neutral but his eyes skeptical as they moved from Karoline to Manuel. "Mr. Garcia," Richard began formally, "I understand from Ms. Leavitt that you claim proficiency in multiple languages." "I speak them," Manuel corrected gently. "I don't have certificates claiming proficiency." Richard's eyebrows raised slightly at Manuel's confidence. "Well, that's what we're here to determine. Please have a seat." Manuel sat at the table across from the 4 evaluators. Karoline took a seat in the corner of the room, her presence both supportive and protective. "Let me introduce everyone," Richard continued. "Linda Murray specializes in Russian affairs, Peter Franklin handles East Asian communications, and Susan Bennett from the State Department works with Middle Eastern countries. I speak French and German myself." Manuel nodded politely to each person. Their faces showed varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. Richard cleared his throat. "Let's begin with a simple conversation in French. Tell me about yourself and your experience with the language." What followed surprised everyone in the room. For nearly 2 hours, Manuel conversed fluidly with each evaluator in their respective languages. He discussed Russian literature with Linda, Chinese history with Peter, and Middle Eastern politics with Susan. He answered Richard's questions in perfect French, then switched to German when requested, without missing a beat. The atmosphere in the room transformed gradually. The initial skepticism gave way to amazement, then to genuine interest. The evaluators stopped following their prepared questions and began having real conversations with Manuel, testing the depth of his knowledge and the nuances of his understanding. "Where did you learn Arabic?" Susan asked, clearly impressed by Manuel's command of the difficult language. "I made friends with a family from Syria who moved into my apartment building 12 years ago," Manuel explained. "They were struggling with English, so I helped them. In return, they taught me Arabic. We still have dinner together most Sundays." "And Mandarin?" Peter inquired. "I worked in a Chinese restaurant for 3 years," Manuel said. "The owners were from Beijing. They noticed I was trying to learn from their conversations and offered to teach me properly. Later, I practiced with students from a nearby university." The assessment continued. More staff members gathered outside the conference room, curious about the unusual evaluation taking place. Word had spread that Karoline Leavitt had brought a janitor to be tested for a translator position, and people wanted to see this for themselves. Richard noticed the growing audience and seemed uncomfortable with the attention. "I think we've seen enough for today," he said, cutting off a conversation between Manuel and Linda. "All ready?" Carolina asked from her corner. "We haven't tested his Portuguese or Italian yet." "This was meant to be a brief assessment," Richard reminded her, glancing at the crowd outside. "But you have to admit he's impressive," Susan interjected, looking at Manuel with newfound respect. Richard hesitated, clearly conflicted. Manuel had exceeded all expectations, demonstrating fluency that even their current translators might envy. But hiring a janitor for a diplomatic position would break every convention in the department. "Perhaps we could use him in a limited capacity," Richard suggested cautiously. "For written translations only, not public-facing roles." Karoline stood up, her expression determined. "That would be a waste of his talents, and you know it. He just demonstrated fluency in 5 languages in front of everyone. What more proof do you need?" The tension in the room was broken by a knock at the door. Greg Phillips, Karoline's deputy, poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but the secretary just called. There's an urgent situation developing with the Turkish delegation for next month's summit. Apparently, there's been a miscommunication in the translated documents, and they're threatening to pull out." Richard looked alarmed. "What kind of miscommunication?" "Something about the wording in the economic cooperation section," Greg explained. "They're saying our translation changed the meaning of their position." Susan groaned. "This is exactly what we were afraid of. Our Turkish translator is decent but not native level." Manuel cleared his throat softly. All eyes turned to him. "I don't speak Turkish," he admitted, "but I am fluent in Arabic. Perhaps I could speak with them in Arabic to clarify the misunderstanding. Many Turkish diplomats speak Arabic as a second language." The room fell silent. Richard looked from Manuel to Karoline, then back to Greg. "The Turkish ambassador is on the phone now," Greg added. "He's requesting to speak with someone who can address this immediately." Richard made a quick decision. "Bring the call in here. Let's see if Mr. Garcia can help us resolve this." Greg hurried to transfer the call to the conference room phone. Manuel straightened in his chair, taking a deep breath to calm his nerves. When the phone rang, Richard answered and put it on speaker. "Ambassador Yilmaz, thank you for your patience. I have someone here who might be able to help clarify the situation." Manuel began speaking in Arabic, his voice steady and professional. The ambassador responded in the same language, his tone initially suspicious but gradually warming as the conversation continued. For 15 minutes, Manuel and the ambassador discussed the problematic document, with Manuel occasionally translating key points into English for the benefit of everyone in the room. His diplomatic instincts were surprisingly good for someone without formal training. He found a way to acknowledge the ambassador's concerns while defending the American position. By the end of the call, the ambassador was laughing at something Manuel had said. They concluded with warm farewells, and Manuel promised to personally review the revised documents before they were sent. As Richard ended the call, the room erupted in applause. Even the staff members watching through the glass joined in. Manuel looked overwhelmed by the response. Karoline beamed with pride from her corner. Richard turned to Manuel, his expression now one of grudging respect. "It seems we might have a position for you after all, Mr. Garcia." 2 weeks later, the entire office gathered in the main conference room for a special announcement. Rows of chairs had been set up, and nearly every seat was filled. The room buzzed with excited conversation. Everyone had heard stories about the janitor who spoke 9 languages and saved an important diplomatic relationship. Karoline stood near the front of the room, talking quietly with Susan from the State Department. She kept glancing at the door, waiting for Manuel to arrive. This moment meant as much to her as it did to him. Richard Howell entered the room, followed by several senior officials, including the secretary herself. The crowd quieted immediately. Richard took his place at the podium while the others sat in the front row. "Good morning, everyone," Richard began, his voice formal but with a new warmth that hadn't been there before. Thank you all for coming. Today marks an important occasion for our department, one that I believe will inspire us all to think differently about talent and opportunity. The door at the back of the room opened and Manuel walked in. Karoline caught her breath. He was wearing a new suit, nothing fancy, but well-fitted and professional. He stood taller than before, with confidence that came from being seen for his true abilities. Richard gestured for Manuel to join him at the front. For those who don't know the full story, 2 weeks ago, Ms. Karoline Leavitt brought to my attention an extraordinary situation. She had discovered that one of our maintenance staff, Manuel Garcia, possessed remarkable language skills that were going completely unused. Manuel smiled shyly as he took his place beside Richard. I must admit, Richard continued, I was skeptical. We have traditional hiring practices for a reason, or so I thought. But Ms. Leavitt was persistent, and Mr. Garcia was given a chance to demonstrate his abilities. Richard turned to look directly at Manuel. What followed was one of the most impressive displays of linguistic talent I've ever witnessed. Mr. Garcia conversed fluently in 5 different languages with our top specialists, showing not just basic proficiency, but deep cultural understanding and nuance. A murmur of appreciation ran through the crowd. Many of them had heard about the assessment but hadn't witnessed it personally. As if that weren't enough, Richard went on. Mr. Garcia then helped us resolve a serious diplomatic situation with the Turkish delegation that threatened the upcoming Global Security Summit. Using his Arabic skills, he found common ground where our regular channels had failed. Karoline couldn't help but smile as she watched Richard speak with genuine admiration about Manuel. This was a far cry from the dismissive attitude he had, shown just 2 weeks ago. Today I'm pleased to announce that Manuel Garcia is joining our international communications team as a special language consultant, Richard said. His unprecedented language skills will be invaluable for the upcoming Global Security Summit and beyond. The room erupted in applause. Manuel looked overwhelmed, his eyes shining with emotion. He shook Richard's hand firmly as the applause continued. When the clapping finally died down, Richard surprised everyone by adding, I also want to acknowledge something important. This appointment represents more than just gaining a talented team member. It challenges us to reconsider how we identify and nurture talent within our organization. He looked directly at Karoline. Ms. Leavitt showed remarkable insight and courage by advocating for Mr. Garcia. She saw beyond titles and credentials to recognize true ability. That kind of thinking is exactly what we need more of in government service. More applause followed, and Karoline felt her cheeks flush with pride. The risk she had taken had paid off beyond her expectations. After Richard concluded his remarks, the gathering turned into an informal reception. Staff members lined up to meet Manuel properly, many of them admitting they had passed him in hallways for years without really seeing him. Manuel's family had been invited to the event as well. His wife Rita wiped away tears as she watched her husband being treated with the respect his abilities deserved. Their children, Luis and Elena, looked at their father with new eyes, seeing the impact his gift could have in the world. Carolina made her way through the crowd to congratulate Manuel. How does it feel? She asked when she finally reached him. Manuel smiled broadly. Like a dream. I keep thinking I'll wake up with a mop in my hand. No more mops, Karoline assured him. From now on, you'll be using your real talents. I can never thank you enough, Manuel said seriously. You changed my life by simply taking the time to notice. You changed your own life by never giving up on learning, Karoline replied. I just opened a door. The secretary approached them, ending their conversation. Mr. Garcia, I've heard remarkable things about you. I understand you'll be handling several key translation assignments for next month's summit? Yes, Madam Secretary, Manuel replied confidently in perfect English. I'm already working on the preliminary documents. Excellent, the secretary said. We need your skills more than ever. The world is complex and communication is everything. As the reception continued, Richard pulled Karoline aside. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I was wrong to be so dismissive of your idea. "You came around in the end," Karoline said, graciously. "That's what matters." "This has me thinking," Richard admitted. "How many other talented people are we overlooking because they don't fit our traditional molds? How much potential are we wasting?" Karoline had been wondering the same thing. "Maybe we should find out," she suggested. "This doesn't have to be a one-time exception." 6 months later, Manuel was overseeing a new initiative that he and Karoline had developed together. Called Hidden Voices, the program identified and developed linguistic talent from non-traditional backgrounds. They found taxi drivers who spoke 5 languages, restaurant workers who were fluent in rare dialects, and elderly immigrants with language skills that couldn't be taught in any university. The program became Karoline's legacy project within the department. It identified dozens of individuals with extraordinary abilities working in overlooked positions and created pathways for them to use their talents in government service. For the Global Security Summit, Manuel led a translation team that included 3 people discovered through the Hidden Voices program. Their work was flawless, earning praise from foreign delegates and American officials alike. Manuel's first official diplomatic assignment came during the summit itself. When a potential misunderstanding arose between the Chinese and Saudi Arabian delegations, Manuel was called in to help. His ability to communicate in both Mandarin and Arabic, combined with his natural diplomatic instincts, helped resolve the situation before it became problematic. On the final day of the summit, Karoline watched from the back of the room as Manuel interpreted a complex negotiation between 3 different countries. He moved effortlessly between languages, his confidence and skill evident to everyone. It was hard to believe this was the same man who had been emptying trash bins just 6 months earlier. But then again, he had always been this person. His abilities had always been there, waiting to be recognized. As Manuel caught her eye and smiled across the crowded room, Karoline felt a deep sense of satisfaction. What began with a chance late-night encounter had transformed not just Manuel's life but changed institutional hiring practices and challenged long-held assumptions about where talent could be found. The janitor who spoke 9 languages had indeed left the whole office and eventually much of Washington stunned. But more importantly, he had opened doors for countless others whose voices had been hidden for far too long.